This episode of the Jeff Rubin Show is brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace makes it easy for you to create a professional, good-looking website. I'm going to give you just three of the potential types of people who could maybe use Squarespace. One, maybe you're a creative professional. You're a photographer, an illustrator. You have some sort of portfolio you want to show off. Squarespace makes it simple for you to show off your work in a way that is both professional and just a little bit nicer than what everyone else is doing. Two, maybe you manage some sort of online storefront. Squarespace makes it easy to take custom orders, print packing slips, all the kind of things you might need to do while you're running a business. And keep in mind, you're going to look good doing it. Three, maybe you're a blogger. Squarespace's social media integration makes it easy to tie this new, great-looking website you've designed into the rest of your social media presence. It really is quite neat. They handle everything from the domains to the hosting. It really is quite something. They handle everything from the domains to the hosting. It is the simplest way to set up an exceptional website. And if you are listening to these words right now, I have a special offer for you. Go to squarespace.com/Jeff Rubin and enter the promo code Gaming101. Gaming 101, because this week's episode is about a collegiate video game course. It sounds crazy now, but in an hour, I guarantee you'll never be able to forget that there is a thing called Gaming 101. So go to squarespace.com/Jeff Rubin, enter the code Gaming101 for a free trial and 10% off any purchases you may make from there on out. And here's the episode. Hey everybody, welcome to the Jeff Rubin Show. I am Jeff Rubin, and today I am joined by Eric Zimmerman. Hey Eric.
Hello, Jeff.
Eric, I believe, setting the land speed record for least amount of time between Jeff Rubin Show appearances. Eric was just weeks ago on Video Game Debate Club 2, the live show, because he is one of the creators of the metagame. There's a lot more to Eric than just creating the metagame. He is also an independent game designer. He co-founded Game Lab, which you may know from producing the game Diner Dash, which we talked about in the first Video Game Debate Club episode. And also, the thing I really want to talk about today is Eric is a professor. Should I be calling you Professor Zimmerman?
I actually am officially a professor. That's correct.
Professor Zimmerman.
I'm a professor of game design
at the NYU Game Center. And we're actually at NYU right now. And I'm really excited about this because I'm walking down the hallway here, and there are just people in computers in front of consoles. There's arcades out there, arcade games, and people are just playing video games, and I think they may be working. Is that correct?
That is correct.
This is insane.
Yeah.
Everything is topsy-turvy in this world. I have so many questions about it.
All right. Well, we are here at the NYU Game Center. We're at Tisch School of the Arts at NYU.
So it's already, I'm interested. It's filed under arts.
Right. Well, that is one of the things that I love about where we are at the Game Center. Not just that we are studying games at the Academy, but also that we are shoulder to shoulder with other forms of culture. Tisch is most famous for its film program. Spike Lee, whose office is actually literally the door next to mine here in my office. He's a creative director of the grad film program. And so we're shoulder to shoulder with film, television, theater, performing arts, writing, and other art forms. So games are a form of art, media, entertainment, popular culture, whatever you want to call it. But as opposed to a lot of places where you can study games in maybe a more vocational vein or maybe a more technical approach, we are really looking at them as a form of creative culture.
How old is the NYU Game Center? Is this a recent invention?
The NYU Game Center, I should know this. I think we're about 4 years old.
So that's pretty new.
Fairly new. That's right. Fairly new. Now, the funny thing is I've actually been teaching game design here and there as a part-time professor while I was running game companies and making video games for almost 20 years. But this is the first time that I've ever been a full-time professor. So that just happened a few years ago.
How did that work? How did you make that jump from game design to teaching game design?
Well, the funny thing is that I guess I have to talk a little bit about my background.
Please, yeah.
I actually was trained as an artist. I have a BFA in painting and an MFA in art and technology. So I remember when I was a painter you would go to these classes where you would do exercises in art school, right? Like color exercises, this color next to that color, and figure drawing, and learning the basics of what it meant to make art. Now, that doesn't mean that you would end up doing figure drawings in your artwork. A lot of us ended up doing very conceptual things, but you're training a visual sensibility. You're learning about the history of what it meant to make art, to get instruction in art. You know, you're part of a community where people are all trying to become artists, right, in a university setting.
And that's all good things.
Those are all good things, right? I guess they could be seen as bad things. And art is obviously a huge category that's incredibly diverse. And, you know, today many artists have nothing to do with making beautiful objects for galleries, the sort of classical, you know, 20th century idea of what art is. But in any case, after I finished school, I started working at a company in New York City after I finished graduate school called
What'd you go to graduate school for?
I got an MFA in Art and Technology at the Advanced Computing Center for the Arts and Design at The Ohio State University.
That sounds, at the time, that's probably the closest thing to Game Center, right?
Kind of, yeah. When I went, there were very few places to get an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts. In other words, a creative degree working with technology. Today, every art school has, and every art department or university has something where you can do digital design and technology or media something, you know, where you're working with computers. So at the time, though, the funny thing was that I started teaching actually at the Interactive Telecommunications Program, or ITP, here at NYU, which is 5 floors down from us. We're on the 9th floor. They're on the 4th floor. And that's a design and technology program that's been around for a long time. They're not necessarily game focused, but I heard that they wanted a game class. So as soon as I heard that, I thought, I want to teach that class. And I actually grabbed another friend of mine, Frank Lance, who now is the director of the Game Center, and he and I team taught that course. When we started just trying to put together a syllabus and thinking about, okay, what does it mean to teach game design? And we actually went to NYU's main library, and I remember typing game into the computer. This was almost 20 years ago, so it was one of those, you know, bright green text on black.
Like
a
terminal.
Yes, exactly. It was a computer terminal, exactly. So I remember typing that in, and these sort of books came up, and we kind of started learning that there really weren't books about designing video games, although there were interesting books in anthropology and folklore and philosophy where people had looked at games mostly before the advent of computer and video games as something interesting culturally or philosophically to investigate. But the funny thing is that there was no field of game design. Right? The funny thing is that when I was a painter, there wasn't just one field. I mean, there were schools of thought. Art is about, you know, line, color, and composition. No, art is about changing society. No, art is about the psychology of the viewer as it relates to the artwork. You know, these were all sort of very different approaches. Art is about meaning and language and how that's changing. No, art is about disrupting people's daily lives too. So there were competing schools of thought and models for what art is and ideas about what it meant to study art. In video games, there just was nothing. There was no discipline of game design that you could be for or against or sort of, you know, find your way around in. So,
and this is 20 years ago?
This was about 20 years ago.
So
yeah.
I'm just trying to like place where we are in video games. This is kind of like a Super Nintendo era.
Right.
PC games, pretty
right.
developed
this
market.
Is the
like, what's popular now?
Early 90s. So
Doom is out there.
Yes, Doom just came out. This was Myst. Myst was coming out.
Definitely like a turning point where video games are starting to mature and get a little more complex.
Right. 3D video games are just coming out. So Virtua Fighter, I think, came out at the turn of the 90s. So the first 3D video games are out. There's a renewed CD-ROMs are a hot technology. And people also are doing some online gaming, like was it the Imagine Network? I think where
maybe.
people were
like
doing
the Sierra thing.
Yeah, Sierra Online, very early online gaming experiments. Adventure games were still hot. Classic LucasArts games were coming out then. So it was an interesting time for video games. But But in terms of understanding what they did and what it meant to study them, Frank and I kind of had to figure out, well, what's our approach going to be? And it was kind of weird and wonderful figuring out how we're going to study these games. Now, the interesting thing is that there's a difference between being like a cultural critic or scholar or historian and studying games from a humanities point of view. That's actually not what I do, and that's part of the Game Center's curriculum, but it's not its focus. Game design is different. I wanted to think about game design like we think about architecture or graphic design as a field that helps the people that are making stuff. In other words, what is the relationship between theory and practice? What are the main concepts that that can help us understand what games are and how they function and how we create meaningful experiences for players, so that game designers around the world aren't sort of all having to kind of invent their own language and figure out these sort of pretty tough problems of designing good games on their own. Could there be a body of knowledge that we share? People didn't even know what game design meant. And in fact, even now it's kind of hard to define how game design is different than programming. It's different than visual design. It's different than project management or kind of managing the overall process.
It combines all those things, really.
It does, and it also has things that are unique to game design. You know, I mean, if you buy a board game, for example, what are you really buying? Well, you're buying some materials. So there's some art direction and illustration, maybe like a board and some cards and some dice. And you're buying a set of rules, right, that tell you what to do. Now, the rules overlap with the materials, right? I mean, if you buy a deck of cards, there's a certain number of cards in the deck. There's, you know, this amount of green and this amount of red, and they have numbers on them that have all been designed. So the rules are also instantiated in the materials, but the game designer essentially creates those rules. So you're right in that they kind of integrate writing and visual design, and in a video game, maybe audio and programming to create a player experience. So they're kind of like experience designers, which is, you know, another term that people throw around for people that are designing websites or maybe amusement park rides, you know, that they're experience designers. So game designers are experience designers too. But the thing about that moment in the early 90s when Frank and I were just starting to teach game design is that we really were figuring it out. Other people were figuring it out too. We weren't alone. Mm-hmm. But I think that our teaching, and then I did some writing. I wrote a textbook, Rules of Play, with Katie Salen.
Weighing down my cheap mic stand now.
Yeah, it actually is on the table helping hold up the mic stand. Rules of Play is a book that I wrote with Katie Salen, which was based on teaching I did with Frank and folding in Katie's ideas to just think about, you know, what is this thing called game design? And, you know, to bring it back to the NYU Game Center, in a lot of ways, you know, I taught at a lot of programs where there was the game class. So I taught at MIT's Comparative Media Studies, an interactive narrative class. At ITP, Interactive Telecommunications program here at NYU, it was the game class. I taught a game design class at School of Visual Arts. But the luxurious thing about the NYU Game Center is that it's not the game class in some other curriculum. It's an entire degree program and set of classes that is just focused on games. And it's incredibly luxurious. It's like I've been starving all my life and now I'm at a banquet table and, you know, you don't even know where to eat first.
Is that rare? Are there many programs like this?
It is and it isn't. There certainly are a lot of places to get degrees in games. We're not the first by any means. I would say there's been a few generations of game-related programs. A lot of them, like where I went to graduate school, wasn't game-focused, but it was really a technology program emerging out of, in that case, computer graphics. The next generation of programs that sort of emerged that were maybe game-focused or very game-related, they never could use game in their title because games were a dirty word for a long time. Another thing that was happening a little bit prior to the turn of the 90s was like the Mortal Kombat era, in fact, Sega CD was also around that time. And remember Night Trap?
How can I forget?
Which was, you know, that was one of the games that
like in Congress.
Exactly.
It was arguing about it.
And the funny
I think we brought that up at the one of us brought that up.
Oh, really?
At the game debate thing.
Probably one of the cheesiest games ever made.
It's a terrible game. It's unbelievable how much damage that game did to gaming's reputation, considering the quality of the game and how few people have actually played it.
Right. Well, as opposed to Grand Theft Auto, which is a fabulous game on a lot of formal levels, even though it's also done cultural damage to games as well.
That's true too, but it earned that damage.
Right, exactly.
They had the right to do it.
It was. I mean, Night Trap was almost like a pin the tail on the donkey. Like someone just pointed at this game.
Yeah,
and,
I feel like you would absolutely tear shit up at the metagame. I do not want to be playing you at that. I feel like, beyond the fact you designed it for you to win at.
The metagame was definitely designed around the whole idea of arguing about games, which, yes, is something that does happen around the Game Center.
Is the NYU Game Center the NYU Video Game Center, or do you also learn about board game design and card game design?
It is game in the broadest sense of game. So the NYU Game Center is now a department. We're a department of game design in Tisch School of the Arts. And we teach classes. So we have people come from all over the university and take classes in game design, game production, game scholarship. We also have an MFA program, a 2-year Master of Fine Arts program. And that just started this year. So some of the students that you saw when you were walking down the hallway to my office, that is our first crop of students that just started in September, and they're starting their second semester now. So those students are getting an MFA in game design, a Master of Fine Arts in game design. In addition, the Game Center does lots of other stuff. For example, we have what we call the Open Library. It is a library of board games and mostly video games with more than 2,000 titles in the collection, and all kinds of consoles, historical and present day, from Vectrex and in television up through, PS3 and Xbox 360 and Kinect. So
you're telling me students have open access to classic and retro consoles and new consoles and games for all of them?
Not only that, but we assign them as homework
This is
to play.
insane. This is like some topsy-turvy world. I cannot believe this exists. I've never wanted to go back to college until right now.
We also do events. So the other thing about the NYU Game Center is that we're constantly doing events. We have world-class scholars and designers come here. Just this last weekend, we hosted the largest North American location for the Global Game Jam, which is a 48-hour jam where people come together and make games in a short period of time. We have exhibitions. We have tournaments. We have a StarCraft tournament called Fallcraft. We do Spring Fighter, which is our Street Fighter tournament. So we do a number of tournaments every year. There's always kind of stuff going on. We become a hub of game culture and community here in New York City.
Is there a class where you can teach me to be sick at video games? Like you're just teaching Street Fighter combos?
It's really funny that you say that, because just this semester we've started a new category of class called Play Labs.
No.
And the idea of Play Lab
I was kidding. You can do this?
Yes. Well, there's two answers to your question. There's Play Labs, which is basically deeply playing a game. If you take a film appreciation class, you will spend a lot of class time watching films, right? Then you discuss them and write papers about them. It's really important for us that our students are playing games, because it's only through playing games that you play them well. So I mentioned the 3 parts of our curriculum. They're like the 3 legs on the stool. Those legs are design, production, and scholarship. And we can talk about what those mean. But the foundation that's under the stool, to do this furniture metaphor, is literacy. In other words, I teach introduction to game design. First game design class for students. They're not working on the computer. They're making card games, board games, physical games, social games, non-digital games. But I realized that, we try and talk about a lot of games. We analyze games. But the students come in with very different experiences of games. This student is hardcore into German strategy board games. This student is a Japanese role-playing game master. This student is awesome at first-person shooters. This person spends all their time playing casual games, but they're not playing each other's games. So they don't have a well-rounded... So it was hard for me to say, well, like in a collectible card game like Magic the Gathering, we're going to talk today about, player creativity and customization and how the metagame fits into the, the core game design. And we didn't share a common literacy. So we have this class that we started a couple years ago called Games 101. Games
Can
101.
I audit this? I want to audit this class.
You, Jeff, we will grant you a special audit. Although,
oh my God,
I
might take you up on that.
we are legally not allowed to have anyone audit, so I didn't just say that. But of course, I will be happy to sneak you into the
No one
classroom.
can hear us wink on the podcast.
Okay. But Games 101 is now this we teach. Games 101 was our attempt to make like a conservative course. We wanted to make like a class with exams and quizzes and an essay exam.
Is it like
at the
beating
end.
you in Street Fighter, the final exam?
I wish it were. No, but we're getting to that. There is a class where there's a tournament at the end of the class.
Oh my
God.
God.
But we're getting to that. Games 101 came first. Games 101 is a big style lecture class. I think there's like 70 or 80 people, and it's always waitlisted, so it's full every semester. And it's a prerequisite for all of our other classes. It's the foundation. Every week, a different professor comes and lectures about some genre or type of game. So Frank Lance starts talking about ancient board games in the Roots lecture, and then he talks about sports. I come in the week after that and talk about adventure games, with the very earliest text-based adventure games leading up through Heavy Rain, for example, which is a kind of modern inheritor. Every week, there's a number of key games, and students actually have to play those games. So you have to spend a certain amount of time playing a handful of games, and they choose one to write a little paper on.
I feel like you're making this up.
I know, isn't it amazing?
Happy. It's incredible.
Yeah, you got there's the biggest smile on Jeff's face
This is
right now.
unbelievable. I can't believe that.
But you know what? Is it so weird? I mean,
no, I don't think it is. I'm happy because I'm so glad
Yes.
it finally exists. I don't think it's weird at all. Are there games that people? You know, some works of literature are kind of infamous for being tough to slog through, like
Right.
Ulysses or something like that. Are there games that people kind of groan and complain about having to get through?
Well, I'll give you an example. In my adventure game lecture week, some of the games that they have to spend time playing include Adventure for the Atari 2600.
All Atari 2600 games are terrible.
I would beg to differ. I love Adventure for the Atari 2600. It's the first graphical adventure game. It's actually an action adventure game. But they play some Zork, text-based. Not all the students like the text-based adventure, but it's kind of like you gotta listen to Gregorian chants before you get to Mozart, right?
Totally.
So, and the LucasArts games, we do a little bit of Secret of Monkey
Those
Island.
are hard. I went back and I played Day of the Tentacle, which I remember loving, and I remember specific puzzles from even all these years later, and I consider a great game. But I played it for like 20 minutes, and I was like, what do you do with this thing? Those games are hard, though. I find the gameplay of those LucasArts Adventures games is kind of dated, and I think one reason I remember them so well and I love them so much was at the time, no one had graphics like that. No one had writing like that. They were basically the only game with cartoony graphics and cartoon writing and funny, sharp writing. But that gameplay, it's tough. It's tough to go back to.
It is. And, we emphasize to the students that they're not here to enjoy the games, right?
Yeah.
They're here to get literate. Mm-hmm. And whether they love it or they hate it, they're here to be critical. And it's great to try and figure out why you're having the reaction you are. But not liking a game is no excuse for not spending time with it.
So these students, if you're 18 now, like what console did you grow up with? Nintendo 64?
It's scary.
PlayStation 2?
A lot.
How does math work?
A lot of Game Boys. A lot of Game Boy.
Well, I had Game Boy when I was a kid. Game Boy just lasted forever.
Yeah, that's true. I couldn't even tell you. It's weird. Yeah, it's weird to me that there are people born after, I was already fully formed adults. I'm still getting over that.
Right.
But it's funny because that's true what you say about games feeling dated, but I feel in a funny way that we've also kind of turned a corner, that technology is no longer the dominating factor that's driving video games as a cultural form. That there are things like indie games and retro aesthetics and, Kickstarter games and things like that. Obviously, technology still has a huge influence on games, on where you play them and how they're distributed. But I love it that we're getting a little bit more into the realm of fashion with games, that hemlines go up and down. And it's weird that something that looked dated 12 years ago suddenly can look fresh again in a slightly different context. So,
like what game would that? What are you thinking of?
Well, if we're talking about text adventure games, I think in a funny way that, like, Tim Schafer's coming back to old adventure games. Let's see what they do with it. But, Dave Gilbert just came out with a new classic graphical adventure game, The Cave.
I played it a little bit.
And I haven't played it yet, but I hear that it's actually pretty good and interesting and a new take on this classic genre.
And these are all the classic, just so people know what we're talking about, these are all like the classic LucasArts designers who worked on Monkey Island and Throttle.
Right. Dave Gilbert was working with Double Fine.
Tim Schafer.
Tim Schafer, right, on all of those all those games. So, in Games 101, they also take a quiz every week. They have to know names and dates and authors and major concepts of
That's
games.
Interesting, because even as much as I love video games, and we talked about this briefly before we started recording, I don't know any designers. Like, I don't know who designed what off the top of my head.
Yeah, so they get literate. That's the idea. They get literate in it. And I have to tell you, I've taught for many, many, many years. I've never taught a class where students had to take a quiz or exam. I always taught design classes. We're making stuff. We're talking about books, maybe writing papers. But
do students do poorly? Is there like someone who's not doing well in that class?
Students, there's a range, right?
That's so tragic.
There's a range. Yeah, there's a range. It's not an easy class. I mean, it's not a horribly difficult class. It's an introductory level class. But yeah, if you don't study, and they're writing a little paper every week. Every week they write what we call critical play report, which is a paper about a game. So about one of the games that they played. So one of the things is that we now decided that we needed more classes like Games 101, but where we go deep into a genre, right? So we're actually, as of this semester, Jesse Fuchs, who's an adjunct instructor here at the NYU Game Center, he's a local New York City-based game designer. He worked with Zach Gage, who's the designer of Spell Tower, on a board game called Guts and Glory that they're funded through Kickstarter, and it's this whole New York indie game scene. Jeff's looking at me like
I actually have heard of Guts and
yes.
Glory.
All right.
But yeah.
Jesse Fuchs,
I don't know these.
Brilliant game designer, and very knowledgeable about tabletop games. He's teaching a play lab focusing on contemporary tabletop games. So they're going to be playing games like Dominion, Agricola.
I've literally played thousands of Dominion games online.
Right.
There's a site that keeps track.
Maybe you should come in.
Stop by. I'm only good at the online one.
Give a seminar. Oh, okay.
I'd love. Is there a Catan seminar?
Catan is one of the games that is it Catan or Catan?
I actually had Klaus Teuber on this podcast, and I asked him, and I honestly don't remember the answer. Right. I think he did say Catan, but he was like, "But you can do whatever you want." I was like, "Great," because there's no way I'm going to not say Catan. So I'm glad I have permission. I think that's what happened. That's how I remember it anyway.
That is a class where the students are playing those games. But it's a 2-credit course, so it's a lighter course. It's not quite as intensive. What?
Why no Catan?
Catan is in Games 101.
Oh, okay.
So we want to introduce them to.
That sounds right. That's good.
To broaden their horizons and go deeper.
That.
And they're going to play games like Dominion multiple times. And I don't know how Jesse is exactly structuring the syllabus, but I do know that there is a tournament at the end of the class. I don't think that their grade depends on the tournament. But who knows? Maybe he's doing that. I think there's a written assignment, which might be writing a strategy guide for one of the games that they looked at. So it's really, as opposed to classes that Jesper Juhl teaches, with Jesper Juhl's, I think he might be the first or maybe the second person ever to get a PhD in game studies. So he's a renowned Danish game scholar who's here, like me, one of the faculty. Actually, they brought him in slightly before they brought me in full-time into the Game Center. He teaches classes in game studies, really like hardcore critical theory type courses, looking at games from a humanities point of view, how they make meaning, how they fit into culture, what are the ways that we can look at and understand games. This is a class, Play Labs, Jesse's class. That's a class really about playing games, right? So those are the parts of our curriculum. There's scholarship, design, the classes that I teach mostly, production, where they're making digital games.
Is that like programming?
Production, yes. The programming courses are in the sort of production group. But there's also classes where, the other class I'm teaching this semester, in addition to a game design course, is one where the MFA students are spending a whole semester making a single game. So that is really a course about how do you work with a group of people that are different skilled. Someone's a programmer, someone's doing visual design, someone is doing game design, someone's focusing on, managing the process. And probably in a small group, they're all wearing sort of multiple hats, but they're actually making a game together. So that's more like, doing their creative work. I mean, it is an MFA program, and in that sense, we want them to, have a chance to find their voices as creative practitioners. So our program is less about training you to be a cog in the industry, although hopefully people will be able to get jobs, but we want them to be leaders, right? Whether that means they become an influential indie game developer working by themselves or in a small team, or whether it means that they go on to become a lead game designer at one of the major companies, we want to train the people that are going to really innovate in the game industry. So that's why we're trying to provide people with not just software skills and technical skills, but with a really broad base of cultural knowledge that you can, the more, as we talk about Games 101, for example, you sense that you really get a very broad idea of what games are on and off the computer in our program.
Do they choose an area of focus, like I want to work in graphics or I want to work in design? Or
we ask them in the MFA program, we ask them to identify that as they're applying, and they can choose to focus in one or more of game design, visual design, game programming, or criticism. So we also have people coming in that really want to be journalists or scholars of games too, and we love the idea that we're trying to integrate that scholarship into the design program.
Do you ever encounter any skepticism from other members of the faculty or other programs? Do they ever roll their eyes at the game program, or is it seen as equal?
It's funny. I mean, I've been teaching games a long time at the university, and it's gone through phases. I remember when I first started teaching with Frank down at the Interactive Telecommunications program, there was like a weird feeling of sometimes of being disrespected by the administration or other faculty, and I couldn't figure out why it was, Then I remember seeing a poster. So this was in the CD-ROM 90s, and there was this company in New York City called Voyager, and their motto was "Bring your brain." So they were doing smart media. They're the ones that worked with like Peter Gabriel and Laurie Anderson to do sort of multimedia CD-ROMs about their work, and it was cool stuff for its day, absolutely. But I remember they had this contest, and it was called like Visions and Voices or something like that, but it was about like, we want to see all your new great stuff, and we want to put it on CD-ROMs and create the future. But one of their posters said, do not enter this contest if you think the future of computers is, and it was something like pornography, shopping, or video games. Then I realized, oh, that's what's going on,
Those
right?
are probably the number 1, 2, and 3 most popular things on the internet.
Right, probably, yeah, probably. But that was the mindset that games were this kind of gutter culture. I mean, in the early, mid-90s, games are really still considered kid stuff. And it's funny because it goes through cycles, which is weird and more interesting, which is when I start talking to them, often it's about, oh yeah, games. You guys are eating our lunch, meaning like traditional publishing industries are all struggling. Like, how does the music industry survive? How does the film industry survive? Games are still just exploding as a form of media and pop culture in a way that other forms aren't. So it's a weird kind of grudging respect. Even if they're not gamers, they understand that there's now something going on with games.
That seems like I wonder when that changed. Are games... This is an interesting question. Are games... this is an interesting question. Get ready. Are games more popular now than they've ever been? It seems like video games, and particularly iPhone games, and, it seems like more people are playing more games than ever before.
Right.
Is that true?
Yes. I think that is true. Jesper Juhl has written a book called A Casual Revolution. The game scholar I mentioned, he's a professor here. And he writes about that there really in the last several years has been a shift.
And not even putting aside iOS games, like Xbox is bigger than Super Nintendo ever was, and so forth.
Right. And, when I was at Game Lab and we were making games like Diner Dash, our little online games were being played by millions and millions of people. They weren't as profitable per game as, putting down $30, $40, $50 for an Xbox
God of War,
disc.
whatever.
Yeah, but they were actually, played by an incredibly large number of people. I remember having an experience like several years ago when I was giving a talk in someone's class. I wasn't a full-time professor, and I was just sort of visiting someone's class, and I said, okay, before I start, how many of you play games? How many of you in the last week played some kind of digital game on your phone, on a friend's console or something? And virtually everybody raised their hand. Maybe one or two people didn't. And it just struck me that, when I was in college, I'm 42 now. When I was in college, there was a much bigger stigma around games. Games were played by gamers. They really were this geeky basement culture.
I mean, I'm 30, and it was a bigger stigma when I was in college too. So it's when do you think that changed? Is it that recent? Is it in the past 10 years?
I think we'd have to ask Jesper, but yes,
I think
it
was probably more mainstream when I was in college than you were. It wasn't like one day the switch flipped.
No,
but it does seem like we've reached a tipping point.
Right, we've reached a tipping point, and then there were not only are people playing games in their youth more, but also there were platforms like the Nintendo Wii that were geared to try and get adults playing who weren't gamers. So the audience has kind of spread in both ways. So it's funny because even the term gamer sounds a little bit weird now. It didn't sound weird even 5 years ago, but if you listen to music, you're not a musicer. It's like, oh well, you just listen to everyone likes different kinds of music. Occasionally you might meet someone who's not so into music, but they'll still tell you stuff that they listen to. I think games are going to become like that. It's not going to be are you a gamer or not a gamer. It's just going to become what do you play? What kind of games do you like?
I think it's already there because there's so many different types of video games, and someone who plays 20 hours a week of Call of Duty is a completely different gamer than someone who plays 20 hours of Angry Birds or whatever on their iPhone. They're both playing the same amount of games. They're both putting as much time into it, but they're completely different things. They can't both describe themselves as gamers. That doesn't really tell us what's going on. So even today, like I feel like you have to be more specific. Like I have a friend, Streeter, who's like, video games have passed me by. Like I can't play them anymore. But I think he's just thinking of things like Call of Duty and God of War. These like big AAA titles.
Right.
But
meanwhile, he's on his iPhone all the time.
Yeah, the market's actually expanded, and like before that would have been a problem, but now they're creating more types of different games. Someone who owns a Wii is completely different than someone who owns an Xbox in most cases.
And here's why I love that. As someone making games who wants to see games flourish as a form of culture, there was a moment when I was starting to work in the industry in the 90s when games were like all center and no margins. Mm-hmm. Technology was driving things. Consoles were getting more expensive. Budgets were just getting bigger and bigger. Games cost $1 million. Games cost $5 million. Games cost $50 million. And there was no independent games. The web was like in a larval state. It seemed like it was all Hollywood and no independent cinema, right? Where are the college radio stations and club and DJ culture of games? Although even now to say college radio stations, it's all internet and et cetera, et cetera. But at the time we were saying, where's the independent culture of games? So the great thing is that now that exists, so that there's incredibly deep subcultures of people that love turn-based strategy games on and off the computer.
Yeah. What if someone likes World of Warcraft? Someone who likes World of Warcraft is a completely different gamer than someone who likes StarCraft. Even that's like pretty hardcore, but there's such a range of and different, so many dimensions to it.
Right. And actually, and this is exactly why this is our challenge about teaching games at NYU, at the Game Center, because that's why we have a class like Games 101 to try and establish a common foundation. But I love it that there are students in that class that know more about genres of games, in particular games, than any of the professors. There are students in that class on the NYU StarCraft team. There is a team that plays in a collegiate league. And that person knows more about StarCraft. So that week, when we do strategy games, and StarCraft is one of the games that they play in their recitation, that student is helping lead that recitation, right? If the recitation leaders, making good use of their students. So I love that it's a community where we really can celebrate. We can celebrate pop culture as a living thing. We're not looking just at the past. We really want to celebrate what's now. And so one of the things I love about the Game Center is that there are certain things we do and people that we bring in that are more academic. Ian Bogost is an academic based in Atlanta. He did Cow Clicker, but he also writes about the history of Atari and also about the intersection between journalism and games. So he came in and gave a very theoretical lecture where he was quoting Latin philosophy and things like that, and that's great. At the same time, we have Fall Brawl or Spring Fighter, our fighting game tournaments, where the halls here get filled with hundreds of fighting game players that are here to compete. We partner with online announcers that do these things regularly and get like hundreds of thousands of people online, following the tournament. So it's great that can be happening in an academic institution. So it's kind of weird. I mean, sometimes I don't really feel like I'm at the university. When I came in this weekend and the Global Game Jam was going on and these hallways and classrooms were filled with like sweaty, unwashed game geeks, finishing their 48-hour stretch making a game, didn't feel like what you think of at a university, right? I mean, it's really there's a nice overlap between pop culture and local design community and highfalutin academic theory and all of that stuff kind of mixed up together. So yeah, it's a really fun place. If people want to learn more about our events, it's gamecenter.nyu.edu. We have a calendar there. Get on our mailing list. We have a regular newsletter. We have stuff almost every week happening here.
Video games, I think, often stereotypically perhaps seen as a male-dominated field. Are there a lot of women in the program?
There are women in the program. They're not a majority of the program. And we try and do a lot to get as much diversity as we can. I think that we want to recognize that games are more interesting when more types of people are making them, in terms of people's cultural background, in terms of their gender. We go for a very diverse student body. And of course, because we're mixing scholarship and literacy of games into our design and production classes, and students are taking a mix of those classes, we're not hiding from those cultural issues. We're studying them. We have units and readings where people are really talking about the politics of gender representation in video games, for example. That's something that we discuss. And it's an ongoing issue, but I think what we're finding is that, like we're saying with gamers, the stereotype is becoming less and less. In fact, I think that probably, depending on how you slice it, there were times when if you included online games that in certain genres there were more women playing than men. For game developers and designers, it is still a male-dominated field, but. Like I said, it's something that we're working actively to change.
I want to talk about the syllabus, kind of the canon. What do you consider like essential? Like I always use this comparison, but what are like the Citizen Kanes of this program? The games that you really hold up as a sterling example of the medium.
Well, that's Games 101. That is the class where we say, this week we're talking about the history of fighting games. What are the games that we select?
So specifically, what goes in that? What's in fighting games? Street Fighter 2, right?
I'm not going to remember because I don't teach that week and I haven't been to that lecture in a while. Street Fighter 2 is definitely there.
But is Mortal Kombat? Historically, it's important, but I don't know. It was a little bit riding the street. If you play Street Fighter 2, you're a little bit covered, don't you think?
Charles Pratt, one of our great adjunct faculty, he gives that lecture. I believe that there's a couple layers, right? There are games that we call key games. Those are the ones they have to play. There's only a handful of those. Then there's other games that we mention during the course of lecture. So I'm pretty sure that Charles mentions Mortal Kombat. Karate Champ is another one. One of the arguably the first.
One, yeah.
Arguably the first.
I think you control it with two joysticks. Is that right?
Yes, two joysticks.
Like one joystick moves you, as traditionally it does, and the other's like high attack, low attack.
Right. He also I think
David Crane game? Is that a David Crane game?
You have me.
I may know a game designer.
Yeah, I'm not good with names and dates.
Let's keep moving.
I'm glad I'm not taking those quizzes. I'll take.
I want to take one of the quizzes.
That would be fun. You know what? We actually posted our midterm online.
Oh, I'd love to take it
for people to take.
I'm gonna check that out.
We actually posted that online.
So which one do you teach? Or which one are you more familiar with?
The two lectures that I've given are adventure games and simulation games.
Okay, so we already talked about adventure a little bit. What goes into simulation? What titles come up there?
The key games for simulation include.
Can I guess some?
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Civilization.
Strategy.
Okay.
Okay. So
well, how do you define simulation?
Well, yeah, here's the thing. We're not into defining genres.
Because I think most great games, a lot of great games combine at least two genres.
Yes. So one thing is that Games 101 is less about this is fighting games and this is how we define the genre. We rarely try and define the genre because they're blurry boundaries. In fact, games are often mentioned on different weeks. So that's less important.
I mean, all games are simulation games in some respect.
Right, exactly.
Like Madden's a simulation.
Well, here's the thing. Simulation is a frame that we can use to look at any game, right? We can think of any game as a simulation. So when I give the simulation lecture, it's not just facts and dates about games. It's, okay, let's use that lens. How do we define a simulation? A simulation is a particular kind of representation. It's one that represents using dynamic procedures, right? In other words, we can represent something by drawing a picture or making a flowchart. But when we say, this is a representation of a fire happening at a school. Oh, I see. It's a video of a school on fire. Here's another representation. It's a fire drill where when you hear it, we're going to pretend there's a fire and we're going to try and follow the behavioral restrictions, the quote-unquote rules of the game, right?
Oh, my God, this is so much harder than I thought it was going to be.
Well, you see what I'm saying? So that suddenly becomes kind of a simulation of a fire that we participate in, that someone designed. So a simulation is a particular kind of representation. But the point I want to make is that we argue a lot about what games should be in Games 101, and it changes every year. We make revisions, new games come out.
What's a new one that got in there?
You're gonna kill me. Charles does indie games, and Jesper does casual games. Those are the ones that change the most. But yeah. I think that I'm in pretty classic genres. No one has unseated any new adventure games or.
Although, yeah, I bet. You know, I bet that's
right.
Not surprising at all.
Well, I mean, it might be that I want to incorporate some of the new, like The Cave. Maybe The Cave comes out, or maybe I do talk about some of the contemporary inheritors of.
Like you mentioned, Heavy Rain. Maybe the Walking Dead game.
Well, the Walking Dead game, yeah. Although there is an action adventure, that's probably more of an adventure game. That Walking Dead is good. You know, I talk about like the interactive fiction community, but now there's this thing called Twine, which is a new web-based, text-based adventure that a lot of people are using to make new. Is
that the Andy Bio thing?
I don't know who made it.
I should know. I'm doing better with designers than you.
You are dropping names
I might be wrong about both of mine, though. I might very well be wrong about both of mine.
Yeah, but who knows?
I'll follow up at the end. I'll double check it before I post it.
If only there were a digital networked
to look
resource.
These things up.
Yeah.
So, simulation games, what's in there? SimCity, got to be in there.
SimCity is a key game.
Okay.
They play,
that is the word sim in it. I didn't want to go with it first because it seemed too obvious.
They play SimCity.
Which one? SimCity, the original one?
They play 2000.
That makes sense.
Yeah, kind of in the middle, right? Not too recent and not too early.
Did you see? I was just reading today. Apparently, the SimCity, the beta for the new one, I think recently came out, or the demo. I don't know, but it looks pretty good.
I have to tell you, we have a conference every year called Practice Game Design in Detail. It's a conference.
You have a conference for everything.
Well, we focus just on game design.
Yeah.
So this is a conference where game designers come from around the world. We had this year, for example, Richard Garfield, designer of Magic the Gathering. We also had Stone Labrandy, lead designer on the SimCity series. He gave a demo of SimCity. We had to turn our video cameras off for that because they didn't want video getting out early, Electronic Arts. But he showed his design diagrams for that, and he actually had these posters that he brought. Those are the actual working like flow charts of how the thing works. It was like porn for game designers. It was cool. People were kind of like were drooling in their seats to really get a glimpse at like this is the inner workings of how a really complicated simulation game works. It was beautiful, and he's such an eloquent, I should say, speaker about game design. So yeah, SimCity's one.
All right, that was a gimme.
Let me hear some more.
I don't know. Civilization and SimCity like loom pretty large in the genre in my mind. Simulation. I honestly don't even know another one.
Well,
give me a hint. Like, give me
another
Will
Wright title.
Oh, The Sims.
The Sims. Yeah, they play. Well, actually, they don't play it, but it is a key game. They need.
Do you ever really play The Sims, or does The Sims just kind of exist and you click on a bunch of stuff?
That's a good question.
That's a bigger question for you than it would be for anyone else.
I'll tell you. You know, it's funny because I more played the original Sims when it came out. I have not played the newer ones as much. So when I talk about the Sims, I focus more on the original Sims, that sort of dollhouse style play. We look at a couple earlier ones. We look at Microsoft Flight Simulator.
Oh, that's okay.
Right? That definitely gets at some issues.
Man, I never really got Microsoft Flight Simulator. What's the this is not a very academic question, but what's the deal with that game?
Well, the funny thing is I remember playing Microsoft Flight Simulator on the Apple II Plus. The original game, the first one that Microsoft put out. And it was incredibly hard to play.
Yeah, because it's like flying an airplane.
It's really a simulation of an airplane. And it was funny because I shared this story when I was getting the lecture together. I was like trying to fly it, and there's this complicated keyboard diagram for all the things. And it was just like when I played it when I was 12 years old. I can kind of tool the airplane around on the runway, but I cannot get it to take off. Because who the hell knows, like, exactly what rudder and aileron and all these different, flaps and things have to go at certain times. And it's really a simulation. It's not a game.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's not fun at all.
Although something like Dope Wars.
Okay.
We also take a detailed look at Dope Wars. So that's an economic simulation.
Now, is Dope Wars, that's like a game, I'd say the primary platform I played that on was my calculator during high school. Is Dope Wars, was it ever an official game, or it just like seemed like one of those things that was just always out there,
Well, I focus on Dope Wars in the late 90s. It was on Palm Pilots. And there was actually an article in the New York Times about how it was popular among stockbrokers in New York City. And there's this whole kind of moment when that was this hot game.
Is that the platform that game is mostly known for? Because there's a lot of, it's such a simple and such a great idea that there's a lot of games that, there's like Weed Wars or Crack. There's a lot of imitations of it, especially like in that Wild West demoware scene of the 90s.
Well, I think it originally came out for like MS-DOS, right?
Yeah, I imagine.
So we actually, I show some screenshots of it in its original form, and we look at it in, some like Facebook type versions, and we look at Lemonade Tycoon and things that kind of came after it. But Dope Wars itself, to me, that's the classic Dope Wars. But, it's like any form of history. It's very subjective. So as a group, it's a special kind of class because all the faculty come in and give lectures on a different week. So it's very subjective about what games we emphasize. But we try and also make it relevant broadly. But like I said, you can't be an expert in everything. I'm not a game historian. I am not a game scholar. I'm really a game designer. Like the classes that I teach that I'm in charge of are mostly classes where people are making stuff, not ones where we're studying the history of games.
As a game designer, what games have come out recently that you really admired just the design of?
I would say the game that I've been playing a lot of is FTL.
Okay.
That game has really captured me.
FTL really got its hooks in me, too. I did an episode at the end of the year where I asked people to recommend their favorite things of the year, and Mike Drucker, recommended FTL, and he really sold. I had heard about it, but Mike really sold me on it. I picked it up immediately. I got so into it. Can you describe that game a little bit?
Yeah, FTL is an indie game. Who was the studio that made FTL?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure.
I'm going to shoot myself. Someone write it in the comments.
Well, I'll look it up. I'll put it at the end.
FTL is a great game that I first heard about at Indiecade, where I think they were a finalist and may have won an award. It is a game that on the surface looks quote-unquote primitive. It's sort of a schematic of a spaceship, and it's kind of a combination between a roguelike dungeon crawl and an adventure game. You have a ship that you're managing, and I think the fantasy that it fulfills is this idea of being the captain on the bridge.
It's very Star Trek-y because you don't have to say that. Keep talking about it.
Yeah, well, no, go ahead.
When you don't have to say, I'm just so excited to talk about FTL. You don't have to say it. Like, you don't have to, like, really do this. But when you're playing the game, the thoughts going through your head are like, all right, I'm going to heat up the missiles, wait till the lasers are ready, then I'm going to fire at their shields, then fire a missile at the engine, and then, like, spin up, put more power, depower the shields, put more power to the engines. That's where we need it. You're managing the doors. There's a lot of door management in the game. Right. You're not like a character on the ship. You're really like barking out orders.
Right. In a sense that, I mean, we could almost call it a simulation in the sense that it really focuses on the kind of micromanagement of the parts of your ship. So you are deciding to route power from life support to shields because, your shields are down, but they need a little bit more power. There's a fire in this part of the bridge, and so you take your expert gunner off of the guns temporarily to try and
put out the fire.
To put out the fire. At the same time that there are these sort of micromanagement of the battles that you have, there's also a longer-term play that is more like an adventure game where you are gaining resources and trying to keep an eye on your fuel, and you are trying to sort of strategically move through sectors of space to pick up as many resources as you can, and the challenges get harder and harder. It's a
very, very difficult game to beat, I think, like, intentionally so.
Yeah, it's a challenging game, but it's really satisfying. But it also, to me, points out the importance of game design, right? I think that that's a game where the strength of the game is not in the graphics. It's not, the writing is sometimes clever, but it's not really the strength of the game. The strength of the game is really in the way that the game plays, the way that there's an increasing challenge that you always feel is difficult but fair. What I love about the game is that there's so many ways to play, right? There's so many different kinds of ships, and you unlock new ships, and each ship plays very differently.
Now, how do you feel about the role of luck in the game? Because the way this works is the way you move through the system is you keep picking different star systems or whatever to jump through. You're in one location, you pick your next location, you appear there, something happens, you move to the next location. And at a lot of the locations, you have a choice. There's a little story choice, and it's like, you receive a distress signal. Do you want to answer it? And you say yes or no, and then basically something random happens. You say yes, and maybe you're attacked. You say yes, and maybe you find a new weapon there. And it gets to the point when you're playing that game, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing necessarily. I'm curious, as a game designer, what you just thought about this. It gets to a point where I'm not even reading the story anymore. Eventually, I just was picking 1 and 2.
That is the case, but that's different than luck, than asking about luck. But you're right that something often happens with games where, and it kind of goes back to our discussion earlier about like violence in games, that people that don't play games look at them over the shoulder of gamers, and they think that games are about the surface. They think that games are about the pixels that are popping up on the screen. That's not what games are about. In other words, when you play a game deeply, you engage less with the surface, and you basically are engaging more and more with the underlying system of the game, especially if it's a game you repeat. Now, if it's more of a linear game that has an ending, that's almost a different species of game.
But FTL, and this is the other thing you should really understand about FTL, is that it is a game you repeat. Like, you have to beat it in one chunk. To get from the beginning to the end takes, I don't know, an hour, maybe 2 hours, and you can save and come back to it, but you can't save, get killed, reload, try it again. You have to do it in one swat. So you do replay it over and over again.
That's how it's like a roguelike game or a dungeon crawl, in that the universe is sort of a deck of cards that shuffle differently the next time, and you don't know exactly what you're going to come up against. Now, that's where luck is interesting. A bad game with luck is a game where, okay, let's roll a die, evens I win, odds you lose. Oh, look, I won. End of game, walk away from the table, right? That's where luck dominates the game. But there's ways to incorporate luck that are incredibly powerful and addictive. Think about poker. There's a lot of luck in poker, hand to hand. But because you're playing many hands, it's almost like you're surfing on these waves of probability, and also you're getting to know the system better, the people that you're playing with. So something similar happens in FTL, that yes, you can get unlucky and have an encounter just when you are really low on your hull and you're trying to, but on the other hand, the more you play, the more you kind of get a bird's eye view of the system, and you realize, well, I probably at that last store should have invested in, getting my hull back to full strength, because I knew that there aren't that many stores in a sector, and I'd probably encountered the only other store in this whole sector. So and there's something about that combination of giving players control over what they do, but giving enough randomness that it's unexpected every time. For me, that's a little hook that really like latches into my pleasure center and like gets me in front of the game again. That's a sort of a beautiful combination. And not every gamer, or game player, I should say, likes the same combination. It's like not everybody likes the same kind of food. But in that case, I think it's just a wonderful recipe.
And FTL is the game that I saw students playing on the way in. Can you describe the assignment that they're doing?
Yeah, the assignment is I mentioned Stone Labrandy. He's a game designer who also teaches game design classes. He hasn't made the jump to full-time professorship the way I did a couple years ago, but he gave a great talk at the Game Developers Conference called One-Page Design Documents, where he was talking about, hey, in the past we wrote these huge design Bibles. I was there when I started in the industry writing these 100-page plus documents. Now we use wikis a lot. He said, but still nobody reads them. When you're working on a team, it's really important to be able to communicate the game design in a way that's understandable kind of at a glance and that people can reference. And so he uses flowcharts and diagrams a lot to embody his game designs. And a lot there, to back up just half a step, the challenge of teaching game design is that what is game design? You know, is it about mathematics and logic and understanding system dynamics? Is it about storytelling and aesthetics and human emotion? Is it about understanding the landscape of popular culture and how everything fits in? And
don't say what it is too loud. The students are out there. They're going to hear your answer.
Right. Well, of course,
They're
it's
hear
all
what's
of the
right.
above.
Oh,
it's all of the above.
I'm the worst student.
So that's a challenge of game design, is that, you know, we're teaching, there's a mathematical component to game design. There's also an aesthetic component to game design, as well as, like, whatever, psychological and cultural components too. So in this case, we're looking at the aspect of game design. It's about visual communication. Game designers need to understand how to communicate to a team that they're working on. Hey, I'm the game designer. There's a bunch of programmers over there. How do I get them to understand the ideas that I'm trying to... You also communicate to players, right? In FTL, some of the criticisms I've heard about are, well, you know what? Like, when something is about to break on a ship, they could do better job of, like, calling it out to the player, right? The visual communication of the interface.
I've definitely been like, why is everyone dying? Oh no, I left the oxygen off.
Right, and you don't want to have that happen. So visual communication, or thinking about how to communicate things.
That's kind of my fault, though. I'm like, I chalk that up to my being a poor space commander.
Right. Borderline. I agree. I mean, that's why FTL is great, because it makes you feel responsibility.
Yeah.
But so what the students are doing with FTL is we looked at a lot of examples of diagrams, flowcharts, one-page design documents. Some from my work, some from Stone Labrandy's lecture. We're reading Edward Tufte, the visual information communication guru, who wrote a whole bunch of books about it. So they have to analyze FTL, find one system within the game. Maybe it's the relationships between weapon types. Maybe it's, you know, the player's economy over time. You know, maybe it's the way that each sector is structured. And analyze that and communicate their analysis through a one-page design document.
What do you look for in those assignments? Like,
Well,
what do you look for the students to accomplish?
In that particular assignment, I'm looking for two things. What's the analysis? Is it insightful? Like, are they not just recording data about the game, but are they actually saying, whoa, actually, I never realized that if you graph the weapons by damage and load time, right, at the time, the charge, you actually see some weird and interesting patterns, right? So is there insight, and then is it well communicated? Now, the thing that they don't know, I often put surprises into the syllabus. What they don't know is that they think it's a 1 week assignment, and they're going to do some other visual communication thing week 2, but it's actually, we're going to tear them to shreds in a critique after 1 week, and then they have another week to redo them, to revise them. Now, when I say tear them to shreds, I don't mean in a negative sense. I mean in a positive sense.
Of course.
What in my universe, the highest form of respect from one designer to another is thoughtful criticism. So we try and really get them to understand how to give constructive critique, and then they iterate. So most of the stuff they do in my classes is not necessarily analysis. This is a kind of special side quest in the adventure of game design class. Most of it is actually making games, mostly off the computer. Board games, physical games, social games, and iteration is the key thing. You don't sit around and talk about what you want to do. You prototype as quickly as you possibly can, and you base design decisions on actually playing, you or other people playtesting your game, and that's how you make a game. And that's one of the key skills that we try and instill. In this case, where it's kind of like, you know, editing and revising when you're writing or rehearsing when you're doing a play. You do it over and over again and you get feedback and you try and improve it, what's working and what's not working. In the case of the one-page design document, the critique halfway through is their chance to revise it.
Now, FTL is a very difficult game, so if someone beats it, is that like an automatic A?
No. But I will say that some of the students were playing the game and they're using the basic ship, the Kestrel cruiser, and I kind of gave them a little trash talk for that. I said, "Oh, really? You're really just playing on the base? You really haven't unlocked?
What do you do instead?
I just
the
unlocked
engineer ship. I got the engineer ship. I think that's the only one I unlocked.
I've unlocked about 4 of them.
Did you see that there's like mods online so you can be like Serenity from Firefly or like the Death Star?
You know, I'm still enjoying the basic game, but yes, I've seen that there are.
I didn't try them yet either, but it's good to know they exist. It's good to know they're out there.
I love that. You know, it just, again, it points to one of the great things about the time in which we're living, that not only are games now not just Hollywood film with no independent cinema, but they're also places where the lines are sometimes blurring between players and designers.
Yeah,
right?
like something like Minecraft.
Right. I mean, it started in Doom, right? That Doom was open source. The level editor was open source, and it was digitally distributed. Doom was an innovative game in many ways, but that was one of the ways that it was innovative. But, you know, the mod community for FTL is just like, you know, one symptom of what's great about this time being a game player.
Is there a game that you hold up, is your all-time favorite, not your favorite game necessarily, but what you think is the most well-designed game, that you just see it as perfectly round and can't find any faults in it? Nothing sticks out.
All right, if I were to answer that specifically, I would probably say Go.
Go, interesting.
The ancient game from East Asia that's sort of like a chess, for your listeners may or may not know, but it's the game you've seen that's played on a grid. There's how many? Yeah, I don't know how to play Go. I've taken some Go lessons, and I was going to beginners classes at the New York Go Society for a while, so I'm not a total novice, but I'm a super baby when it comes to that.
I took a tutorial and gave up in 2 minutes, so I'm a little bit lower than you.
But it's that game of the black and white stones where you're putting them on the grid points. It's a beautiful, beautiful game. The interesting thing about Go is that if you compare it to chess, another ancient, noble, 2-player turn-based strategy game, chess has a lot more special rules. There's different kinds of pieces.
There's like castling
and opening moves and queening a pawn. Go has a much simpler rule set.
That's interesting. Now, is it hard? It's not hard to learn the rules of Go, is what you're saying.
No, the rules are easier to learn. In chess, we now have computers that can beat the best humans, at least at speed chess. In Go, the programs, and there's as much a culture of people trying to write AI Go programs as there is with chess. They cannot yet touch the masters.
That's really it. I've heard that before, and it's what really interests me about Go, that the idea that they can't throw a computer at it and beat it yet is very hard. It intrigues me.
In a sense, it's more complex, even though the rules are simpler. So that's, to me, that's one of the beautiful, interesting paradoxes.
When I mean, it seems like when simple rules can play out in almost an infinite number of ways, like they can in Go, chess, which is a little more finite, I guess, which is probably why it's harder to compute, or even Catan.
Right.
You know,
you mentioned you're a huge Dominion player, right?
Love Dominion.
So that's with Dominion, it's I mean, there's a lot more special rules, and it's a quote-unquote exceptions game where every card is slightly different, but you get a sense of the whole, and the pleasure of the game is seeing how those parts recombine over and over again.
Do you think there are any games that have been invented, any video games really, that will stand the test of time, that we'll still be playing in hundreds of years, like we're still playing chess and we're still playing Go?
That is an awesome question. I don't know what the answer is.
Can I tell you my guess?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not saying
yes. I have a guess too.
My theory, if it's gonna be one, and I'm not confident that it would be, I think Tetris. Yeah. Tetris might be the perfect video game.
Well, that's what you were gonna say? Yeah, I was gonna say Tetris too. Yeah, it's elegant and beautiful and replayable and intuitive.
You can play it on anything.
Right.
It like fits any platform. Except, oddly enough, it doesn't work on an iPhone. I feel like you need 4 buttons, or you need 2 buttons anyway.
I have not tried to play Tetris on an iPhone.
It's not. It wouldn't seem. Have you seen? I interviewed the director of it a long time ago on this podcast, but I actually just got to see the Ecstasy of Order. It's a documentary about competitive Tetris. I think you should check it out. I think you'd enjoy it a lot.
Ooh, I love that.
It's really cool, and like
I've not seen it.
we talked about it on the show, and I just hadn't had a chance to see it until recently. And it's really cool when you watch like these high-level Tetris players playing the game, because there's like a moment where you're like, what are they doing? And then you see something develop, and it's interesting seeing replays, and I think you'd enjoy it.
I mean, one of the reasons why Tetris might not is because I didn't know there was a competitive culture around it, but a lot of our games that stand the test of time, well, I guess there's a lot. Some of them are more folk games and children's games, but a lot of them, and I'm thinking of sports and then, you know, Scrabble or chess and Go, they are deep competitive games, right? That are less about this idea of going through a linear path and the designer telling a story, and they're more about the player getting learning more and more about the system over time. So there's been this huge kind of.
But Tetris would fit into that former school, right?
Well, yes and no.
Like,
I don't know how
you know
deep
all the rules of Tetris pretty immediately, right?
But the thing is, Tetris seems like it is, I could be wrong, a little more about skill than about strategy.
Yes,
but that doesn't
I think
mean
so.
that doesn't mean
I think
it can't be a classic.
Yeah, I think it's tactical because you can't plan. You can only plan so far ahead because you only know one piece ahead.
Right.
What's interesting about the way they play Tetris is they don't do the head-to-head mode where you can send each other lines. It's all about getting the top score, getting the most lines, and it's not about just doing it who has gotten the most lines.
Oh, they're both playing with the exact same.
No, they're not. I don't know that
block drop.
They're not playing with the. No. They're just like turn on the Nintendo. So there's luck in there too. And they talk about how there's like drought, and they actually count at one point. One of the players, like during the tournament, has this really large drought. Drought is the time between the line pieces, which are the key to Tetris.
Right.
And so it's Nintendo Tetris, specifically the Nintendo-produced version of Nintendo Tetris, because there's a Tengen one too.
Right.
And it's not about who's gotten the most lines. It's about who can show up this day, be here in front of the crowd, and get the most lines right now with a random assortment of blocks. And we talked about in that episode when I talked to the director about, before I'd seen the movie, how it's almost like ice skating. It's like figure skating. It's like everyone's really good at it, but like who's going to perform the best tonight under pressure?
Right. That's interesting. How long do the games last?
Not very long because there is a kill screen, effectively. I think it was level 29 or level 30. It starts falling so fast that you don't have time to move the pieces all the way to the side.
Right.
I think 99.9% of people that ever see the game will never get past the part where you can do that. It's still really fast. But there is a point where like just it transcends physical limitation. And so
it must be all about those Tetrises. Those are the big
you want to get as much
so it's like the bingo, like when you see professional Scrabble players play.
I've also had a professional Scrabble player on the show, by the way.
They're always getting the bingo, right?
Because
if you don't get several of those, you're not getting the big scores. So
man, I would love to keep picking your brains for hours, but I think what that basically means is I want to come to the program. I think that's what I'm getting at.
Jeff, we would love to have you. And to be honest, what's the date today? January,
I don't know, 27th or
27th?
Yeah.
28th? February 1st is the deadline for application in the master's program. You actually have a chance to apply if you want to apply.
That would be amazing. It's so interesting. I don't even know that I want to design games. I want to critique them. Produce them. I just want to talk about them nonstop and just learn new games and pick them apart and see what makes them work.
Well, for you and anyone listening to this who's in New York City, like I said, we have a ton of events.
Yeah, I got to come check one of those out.
You don't have to be an NYU person. People come from all over the local community to come to our lectures and exhibitions and tournaments, et cetera, et cetera. So we would love to have everybody come to the Game Center who loves games.
I want to come. I'm going to check one of those out. I'm going to find another excuse, get you back on the show, keep picking your brain about games. This is great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a lot of fun.
I want to start this little post-game segment by doing something we haven't done in a while. A Jeff Rubin fact check. First of all, David Crane did not make Karate Champ. It was made by Technos, a corporation in Japan. Twine is not made by Andy Bio. He made something kind of similar called Playfic. Basically, every time I impressed Eric by surprising him by knowing the developer of a game, I was completely wrong. So, hopefully he wasn't grading. Also, neither of us could come up with it in the moment, but I wanted to mention that the studio that made the absolutely wonderful game FTL is Subset Games. Subset Games, FTL, it's on Steam. You guys gotta check this game out. It keeps coming up on the podcast for a reason. Now, everyone knows new Jeff Rubin shows come out every Tuesday except the first Tuesday of the month. But did you know that new Bleep Bloops go up every other week? And this is one of those weeks. So, head over to collegehumor.com/bleeploop to see a new video I made with Pat Castles, where, what is this week's? Oh, it's a good one. Not like that other garbage. This week, we play video games about sports we don't know the rules of. So that's cricket, that's rugby, that's darts. I know we kind of know the rules of darts, but when you see it, you'll understand. So, new Bleep Bloop this week, new Jeff Rubin show this week. You already heard that, but there's also a new Jeff Rubin show coming out next week. And I know this is all kind of hard to keep track of, so the easiest way to stay on top of it is to follow me on Tumblr, where you can find me at jeffrubin.com, or on Twitter, where I am at Jeff Rubin Show, or my Facebook fan page, or youtube.com/Jeff Rubin. And that is it. If you guys have any feedback, anything you want to talk about, suggestions for future episodes, people you really want to hear on the show, you can tweet at me, where I am at Jeff Rubin Show, as I already mentioned, or I guess you can send me a Facebook message. You know, you can use all those things to reach me, or you can send me a good old-fashioned email, jeffrubin@jeffrubinshow.com. So the whole thing spells out Jeff Rubin Show. And that's it. All right. I have to go register for some classes.